Rush hour. Osaka, Japan. A Monday morning. A commuter train is carrying hundreds of people to work. Anxious over connections, many of the passengers are unaware this will be their last journey, until it's too late. Disasters don't just happen, they're triggered by a chain of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. Japan. The Fukuchiyama railway line, Hyogo Prefecture. April the 25th, 2005. It's rush hour. The platforms are packed. 8:53. Ryujiro Takami is 23 and has been a driver for 11 months. Takarazuka Station. For rapid train 5418M, it's the end of the line. The train has a driver's cab at either end. Driver Takami and 42-year-old conductor Masatoshi Matsushita swap positions so the train can head back down the line for the return journey. 9:03. Rapid train 5418M's final destination is Amagasaki, 7 stops down the track, where many commuters will take connections into the city of Osaka. Boarding carriage 2 at Takarazuka is 35-year-old editor Satoshi Ugura.
I took that train every day to commute to the company I work for in Osaka, and I always sat in the same spot in the second carriage.
Every day, the city of Osaka swells by 1.1 million people. Most of them are traveling from towns and suburbs via a network of railway lines. This is one of the largest metropolitan areas in the world.
I'd been traveling in the same way, in the same carriage, almost every day for 4 years, so I recognized the faces of the people around me. I had headphones on and I was listening to music. The train moved off and I fell asleep.
9:11. Kawanishi Ikeda Station. The platform is busy. A few extra passengers squeeze on. The intricate Japanese timetables mean the train has to arrive at its next destination to the second. (9:13 a.m.) Rapid train 5418M is not scheduled to stop at the next station. It hurtles past the platform at 120 kilometers per hour. Carriage 5. 19-year-old student Tomokazu Chatani is on his way to university in Kyoto Prefecture.
So, it was a perfectly normal day. It just felt like the start of another week.
Tomokazu is starting a new term.
ちょうどオリエンテーションを終えて、
The orientations were over, and from that day, from that week onwards, the real classes were beginning.
ではありました。
As the train approaches the next station, Itami, an alarm activates inside the driver's cab. Rapid train 5418M is over the speed limit. Driver Takami either doesn't notice or chooses to ignore the warning. At the back of the train, the conductor realizes they're approaching Itami station too fast. He reaches for the emergency brake. But driver Takami beats him to it, activating his brake lever just in time. The train comes to an abrupt stop at Itami station.
伊丹駅でのそのブレーキっていうのは、
I'd never felt a train brake as hard as that one did at Itami station, ever.
そうですね、かなり
I was really surprised. Even though I was reading, I was surprised enough that I really noticed it.
それぐらいの驚きでした。
The train has overshot the platform by the length of more than 3 carriages. The driver calls the conductor on the internal phone system.
今バックして定時に戻しますので。
その伊丹駅であったその私が5両目に乗って
Well, the fifth carriage stopping in the position of the first carriage is something that would normally never happen.
ないことで、僕も初めての経験だったのでびっくりしました。
9:15 a.m. While the train reverses, conductor Matsushita makes an announcement.
ご乗車のお客様、電車はただいま後退しております。お気をつけください。
どうしてだろう。電車がバックするっていうこと自体は、
I'd never been on a reversing train before, so that in itself was surprising for me.
ありましたし。
But it was a shock to think that the train had overshot so far that it had to reverse.
かなっていうのは思いましたね。
9:16. The train is now running 1 minute 20 seconds late.
After we left Itami, I was jolted as the train left the station. I felt that the driver was in a hurry.
The train hurtles towards Amagasaki station.
I thought that something was strange, that the train was going a bit fast.
9:18. Carriage 2.
The rattling and vibration on the train became very violent. That's mainly what woke me up.
There was a faraway, rumbling noise.
The next moment, it felt like the train ran over something. There was a bang and everything flipped over.
The lights suddenly went out, and it was really dark. Pretty dark.
結構暗くなっちゃって。
「
From where I was sitting, I was thrown straight ahead in a straight line. Everyone was thrown in the same direction, in that confined space, and I was thrown alongside them. I remember people were underneath me, being thrown along with me.
The carriage rocked violently. If I hadn't been holding on to something, I wouldn't have been able to withstand it. I got the impression that the standing passengers were falling into each other. I think a lot of them did.
I must have hit something and stopped, but I have no memory of it. No memory of hitting anything.
I was terrified. I didn't know what had happened.
The train has crashed into an apartment block just outside Amagasaki Station. Driver Ryujiro Takami is dead. Satoshi Ogura is trapped inside badly damaged carriage 2. His right leg is caught.
It was so quiet at first. You couldn't imagine anyone was alive. There was one person, she was right in front of me. And she said, "My child is here. Please find my child." After a little while, I got the impression that people were starting to move. After enough of them had moved, I was able to free my leg. I pulled out a train seat near my leg, and after that I was able to free my leg easily.
Satoshi is finally free. He searches for the missing child. Despite having a broken ankle, Satoshi lifts her out of the wrecked carriage.
Of course, it's wonderful the child was saved. But in that situation, people survive purely by chance.
Satoshi is hospitalized. His ankle is broken, and he suffered a serious neck injury. 4 carriages of rapid train 5418M have come off the tracks outside Amagasaki Station. The front carriage has slammed inside the parking garage of an apartment block next to the railway line. Carriage 2 is crushed in an L shape around the outside of the building.
As time went on, the faces of those I knew from the second carriage appeared among those of the dead. That was a huge shock.
The Amagasaki disaster leaves 562 injured and 107 dead, with 99 of the fatalities coming from the front two carriages. Now, by rewinding the events of that day and going deep into the investigation, we can reveal what led to Japan's worst rail disaster in more than 40 years. The original accident inquiry is conducted by the Japan Transport Safety Board, the JTSB. With 8.3 million commuters using this rail network every day, they need to find out why the train crashed before tragedy strikes again. They start scouring the site for clues. It's a process Jeff Thorne has been through countless times. As a former UK rail accident investigator, he's reviewing the findings of the official accident report.
When a train derails, there are a number of causes for that derailment. One could be that the train is defective in some way. Another could be the track is defective. And an accident investigator needs to gather evidence from both.
The first thing investigators do at the Amagasaki site is to take a look at the track. They discover a key piece of evidence. Pulverized rock across parts of the rail suggests an unnerving possibility: deliberate sabotage.
Looking for evidence of vandalism is one of the things that is going to be investigated quite significantly and seriously. Putting stones on a railway track is one of the things that the investigator's going to look at. It would need quite a lot of stone to make a significant impact on the train and cause it to derail. But nevertheless, it is a possibility.
Vandals have caused other train derailments in Japan. In 1980, on the Keihan Electric Railway, a group of junior high school students placed a block of concrete on the tracks. The first two carriages of a passenger train derailed and crashed into a house, injuring 104 people. If the Amagasaki crash was caused by vandals, the culprits are still out there. But analysis of the crushed stone found at the crash site eliminates this theory.
Crushed stone on the top of the track was the same as the ballast which holds the track in place. That was an important conclusion.
Ballast is the small granite stones laid alongside and underneath a railway track to hold it in place. The investigators conclude that as the front of the train derailed, the wheels plowed through the ballast and threw it all over the track. The carriages at the back of the train then ran over and crushed the stones, leaving traces on the rails.
The crushed stone didn't cause the accident. It was a consequence of the accident occurring.
Vandalism is quickly dismissed as a cause of the crash. But the examination of the track does lead to new speculation. Rapid train 5418M derailed at the beginning of a sharp bend in the railway line, a curve which delivers trains straight into Amagasaki station. Amagasaki is a vital hub feeding commuters into the city of Osaka.
Osaka is one of Japan's major metropolitan areas and therefore a major commuter hub. People are coming in and out from west, from east, from north and south, every direction, every day.
Dr. Louisa Rubenfien is an expert on the Japanese train system.
The rail system in Japan carries almost half the population of Japan every day. So it's intimately involved in everybody's life.
Japanese commuters have high expectations of the system.
So the timetables are very, very intricate. One train meets another, and that next train will leave within a matter of seconds or minutes, and people count on being able to make their connections.
Rail records reveal that in 1997, train company JR West modified the curve into Amagasaki Station. The radius was reduced by half, from 600 to 304 meters.
So the reason that they sharpened the curve in 1997 and sharpened it so dramatically was because they were trying to accommodate a new line that would take people more efficiently, more rapidly, more directly into Osaka.
When they sharpened the Amagasaki curve, JR West also overhauled the timetable.
That line became known as the tightest timetable in the area.
The new JR West schedule leaves no room for error. Rapid Train 5418M needs to be at Amagasaki exactly on time, so passengers can make their connections into Osaka.
People have very little patience for late trains in Japan. On time in Japan means literally within the seconds within that precise minute that the train is supposed to be there.
So the sharp curve and the tight timetable are part of an efficient railway service. But investigator Jeff Thorne wants to know if the curve played a role in the accident.
The curve outside Amagasaki Station is just over 300 meters radius. That's a fairly tight curve, but it can be negotiated quite safely, providing the speed limit is adhered to.
The speed a train takes on the curve is critical.
If a train is travelling round a curve much too fast, basic physics will just cause the train to topple over.
Early on in the investigation, the train's data recorder, or black box, is found in the wreckage. It records the time and speeds of the train. The data recorder of Rapid Train 5418M reveals it was traveling at 116 kilometers per hour as it entered the curve. To discover if this is too fast, the JTSB investigators run a series of simulations. They realize a train will derail on the Amagasaki curve at 106 kilometers per hour.
It was inevitable that the train was going to derail and tip over.
So speed, combined with a sharp curve, is the key factor in this deadly accident. The speed limit on the curve outside Amagasaki Station is 70 kilometers per hour. Jeff Thorne wants to know why Rapid Train 5418M was traveling at over 40 kilometers per hour, faster than the speed limit.
Accident investigators are always very aware that system faults can occur, equipment can fail, but they're equally aware that humans enter into the equation.
To shed light on the driver's actions, the JTSB investigators take a statement from the conductor. It reveals an unusual incident at the beginning of the journey. This is his testimony.
At around 8:53, we stopped sharply just before Takarazuka Station.
The driver has run a red light, and the train is brought to a halt by a safety system, ATS, or Automatic Train Stop. As a result, it departs Takarazuka Station 15 seconds late. At the next station, Itami, the train overshoots the platform by over 3 car lengths.
On our arrival at Itami, I thought that as cars 5 and 6 passed the start of the platform, we were going a bit fast.
The driver has to reverse the train back into the station. By the time it departs, it's now running 1 minute 20 seconds late. And the train running late is not the driver's only problem.
The driver of the train had overrun the platform at the last station, and this was against JR regulations. The rules said that the conductor had to report the overrun right away and explain it to the supervisor.
Because of the overrun at Itami Station, the driver knows he's now facing disciplinary action. The conductor's statement also reveals that shortly after leaving Itami, the driver calls him on the train's internal phone system.
I can't remember exactly what he said to me, but it was something like, "Please overlook my mistake." I thought to myself, he wants me to report the distance that we overshot as being less than it really was.
The driver was extremely concerned about the overrun and was trying to convince the conductor to underplay it.
As they're talking, a passenger interrupts to complain about the delay in the schedule.
So I just said to the driver, "You're going too fast." Put down the receiver and opened the door to the passenger. The driver probably thought the conductor hung up on me. He's angry with me.
The conductor has no choice but to report the overrun to the main control room. And JR West regulations stipulate he has to do it immediately.
At that time, I thought we'd overshot by about 30 to 40 meters. I'd heard that if a driver only overshot by about 5 meters, that the punishment wasn't too severe. The distance definitely wasn't as little as 5 meters, so I reported that it was 8 meters.
As the conductor makes his report, the driver can hear it over the radio in his cab. All this speaks to the state of mind of the young driver heading into the curve. But when JTSB investigators analyze the black box data, it reveals that 4 seconds before derailment, the driver does hit the brake. What's not clear is why this brake action fails to stop the speeding train. Dr. Ryo Tagaki is a transport engineer in Tokyo. He studied the JTSB accident investigation report.
There are 3 broad categories of brakes that could be controlled by the driver with respect to the train involved in the accident. One of the 3 types is called the service brake, which is the brake that's normally used to stop the train. Another type of brake is the emergency brake.
Investigators recover elements of the braking system from the wreckage. Analysis reveals there is no mechanical failure. The brakes were working. What is strange is how the driver used them in the critical seconds before derailment.
The driver did not use the emergency brake just prior to the accident.
Hitting the curve at 116 kilometers per hour, just as he was about to derail, the driver instead chose to use the normal service brake.
And even though he was using the service brake, we know that he wasn't using maximum braking power. We don't have a way of knowing why this is the case. Among the reasons considered as to why the emergency brake was not used in this accident, one is that the driver has a duty to report the use of the emergency brake to the company.
The strict company rules may have influenced the driver's actions.
There is a theory that the driver involved in the accident was hesitant to use the emergency brake.
This suggests the culture within the train company may have been a contributing cause of this accident.
The pressures that a company like JR West are under, the need to make as much profit as possible, the need for their trains to run on time with very few delays, these are areas which can make a company begin to lose focus when it comes to safety.
The driver, Ryujiro Takami, was just 23 at the time of the accident and had been a driver for 11 months. His short work record reveals an unusual incident. In June 2004, just 3 weeks after he became a driver, he overran a platform by 100 meters. As his company policy for such an error, his employer, JR West, sent him on a re-education program for 13 days.
Employees went into the re-education program because they had failed in some way, somewhere along the way.
Re-education programs in Japan are part of corporate life.
Right. The idea of using psychological means to educate your employees or even to educate your students in school is not at all unknown. It's regarded as quite reasonable.
Masashi Yasuda is Chief Secretary of the West Japan Railway Workers Union. Many of his members at JR West have undergone re-education, or Nikkin Kyoiku.
First of all, Nikkin Kyoiku is often handed out to or given to drivers. That's because drivers make mistakes. They overshoot the stop or go through red lights or make the wrong decision in unforeseen circumstances and don't stop when they should. There are all sorts of cases.
But employees sent on Nikkin Kyoiku at JR West do not face a conventional retraining program.
The program was designed to make them aware of the weight of responsibility upon them and of the implications of their failure. But the way that it went about doing this was to berate them, harass them, demean them. It was a very punitive approach.
For the duration of their re-education, employees are forbidden from carrying out their normal jobs. They're not told how long their re-education will last and face financial penalties the longer it goes on. And instead of being effectively retrained, employees are forced to perform menial tasks.
To be specific, they make you clean up pigeon droppings, make you write endless reports, a page an hour.
The unions believe Nikin Kyoiku is about punishment, not retraining.
I think it can be said that it really violates the human rights of the driver who caused the accident, and that it's bullying.
Minoru Kagitani was sent on Nikin Kyoiku for 5 months after being 2 minutes late for a staff meeting.
When I underwent retraining, it was so terrible that I felt, if they continue to attack me in this way, I probably won't last. I'll have to quit and retire from the company.
Kagitani claims he suffered severe mental abuse during his 5 months of Nikin Kyoiku.
During the retraining, I was verbally abused by the managers and even told to quit. I couldn't sense any training aspect when training was performed that way. I kept saying things were fine to my friends too, with some bravado, but in truth, I hated coming to work. The retraining was very tough, honestly.
Ryujiro Takami had been a driver for just 3 weeks when he overran a platform and was sent on Nikin Kyoiku.
The driver on duty in the JR Fukuchiyama line derailment had undergone 13 days of Nikin Kyoiku, and as part of that had been made to write endless essays of repentance, reports.
Yasuda believes the driver's experience of Nikin Kyoiku had a profound impact on him.
I think that the cause of the JR Fukuchiyama line derailment was the fact the driver was afraid of Nikin Kyoiku. And because he never wanted to undergo Nikin Kyoiku again, the driver was speeding, which led to the derailment.
And the JTSB investigation also concluded the train company's practice of Nikin Kyoiku may have been a contributory factor in the crash.
I understand the mindset of the driver who caused the Yamagasaki rail crash quite well. Considering the state of retraining at that time, it would be natural for a young man in his 20s who had experienced retraining before to want to avoid it, as this was something that even people of my age group found tough.
So the young driver of Rapid Train 5418M may have been under extreme psychological pressure at the time of the accident.
Even after this accident, JR West argued that the re-education program was effective, that its intentions were good.
From a Western perspective, it's difficult to understand how this re-education process could ever really produce results which would enhance the safety of the railway or improve the performance of an employee.
After examining the evidence, we can reveal why a commuter train flew off the tracks outside a suburban Japanese railway station, leaving 107 dead and 562 injured. 10 months to disaster. Train driver Ryujiro Takami attends a controversial re-education program run by train company JR West. The experience may have left him more concerned with avoiding punishment than the task in hand. 25 minutes to disaster. Driven by Takami, Rapid Train 5418M runs a red light outside Takarazuka Station. It's brought to a halt by a safety system known as the Automatic Train Stop, or ATS. Running a red light is the driver's first reportable offense. 4 minutes to disaster. Speeding into Itami Station, the ATS system activates an alarm to warn the driver. The train overshoots the platform. It's the driver's second offense in just over 20 minutes. 2 minutes to disaster. Rapid Train 5418M is now running 1 minute 20 seconds late in a schedule where passengers have seconds to make their connections. Driver Takami knows he's already facing disciplinary action. It's possible he's in such a state of panic he fails to realize his train is dangerously over the speed limit. He enters the tight curve outside Amagasaki Station at 116 kilometers per hour. No ATS system warns him of his error. 4 seconds to disaster. Takami realizes his speed and hits the service brake, but not the emergency brake. It's possible he wants to avoid a third reportable offense. 9:18 a.m. Disaster. "107 passengers lose their lives. But despite the driver's error, the accident could have been prevented. An ATS safety system should have stepped in to save the driver and his passengers. ATS did come to the driver's aid earlier on the day of this disaster. But although it was installed on other parts of the Fukuchiyama line, in 2005, there were no ATS sensors installed at curves. In Japan, at the time of this accident, JR West were not legally obligated to have ATS on their lines.
If the enhanced version of ATS had been available for this curve, it's almost certain that the accident would not have happened.
Since the accident, a former JR West president has been acquitted of negligence for the absence of an ATS transponder on the curve. The court ruled the accident could not have been predicted. And the law has now been changed, so Japanese train companies must have ATS installed on curves. JR West still run their re-education program.
There was a need to get as much as possible out of their employees, but the re-education process was one which led them in the wrong direction. It led them away from a safe railway.
JR West's response is that in a competitive environment, the company compares favorably with other rail companies in its commitment to safety. It states that safety is of the utmost importance to it. The company also states it's reassessing its retraining scheme to make it more effective. Finally, it makes clear that speed restricting measures were in action on the curve in question, but the company did not fully realize the dangers on this section of track. However, there was no speed restricting hardware installed on this curve at the time of the accident. Satoshi Ogura was one of the few in Carriage 2 to survive.
It took me a very long time to come to terms with the effect this accident had on my life.
I learned how precious life is. Life can be lost in an instant, just like this. I was reminded that you only have one life. I became aware of that.
It's the worst single aircraft disaster in aviation history. Boeing crashes into a mountain northwest of Tokyo. 520 passengers and crew perish in a pile of twisted metal. With over 600 747s in service, investigators are under intense pressure to uncover the cause of the crash. If they can't come up with answers quickly, it could happen again. Disasters don't just happen. They're triggered by a chain of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. Japan. Haneda Airport, Tokyo. August the 12th, 1985. 6 p.m. Japan Airlines Flight 123 prepares for takeoff. Destination, the city of Osaka, 400 kilometers away. At the controls is First Officer Yutaka Sasaki. Keeping a close eye on him is Masami Takahama, one of JAL's most experienced training captains. A 26-year-old American, Ward Wallach, is one of a handful of foreigners on board.
My brother Ward became obsessed with Japan while he was studying as an undergraduate.
Now a postgraduate student in Tokyo, Ward has embraced Japanese life despite standing out.
Ward dwarfed his Japanese friend. To me, he looked like Christopher Reeves. He looked like Superman.
Also on board is Japanese actor and singer Kyu Sakamoto.
I think the impression that everyone had of my husband, Kyu Sakamoto, was his smile. He had a big smile when he was performing on television. And he was the same at home. He loved his family. He was kind and someone who always thought of his family.
6:12 p.m. Haneda Airport Tower gives JAL 123 the all clear to take off. Weather conditions are fine. The crew expect a short, routine flight. The Boeing 747 begins climbing to its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet.
Passenger needs to use the bathroom.
Be careful, please. Make it quick.
6:24 p.m. Two explosions rock the plane.
Something exploded. Sekiyato, check the gears.
The aircraft's flight controls don't respond. The crew desperately try to figure out what's happened. Cabin pressure drops.
Attention. Emergency descent. Put the mask over your face, fasten your seatbelt, put out your cigarettes. This is an emergency descent.
6:25 p.m. JAL 123 is now out of control. Captain Takahama declares an emergency.
Tokyo Japan 123, request it back to Haneda. Descend
And radios Tokyo Air Traffic Control.
Take a magnetic course of 90 degrees for radar vector to Oshima.
The crew is trying to wrestle the 747 into making a right turn to follow a course back to Haneda Airport.
Going to right, turn over.
But the plane is not responding.
Yes, sir. I said don't bang that match. Yes, sir. What's going on?
Tokyo Air Traffic Control radios JAL 123.
Japan 123, please confirm you have an emergency.
That's affirmative.
What is the nature of your emergency?
.28 p.m.
Japan Air 123, fly heading 090, radar vector to Oshima.
The plane appears to be heading away from Tokyo Haneda Airport.
Japan Air 123, roger, understood. Japan Air 123, uncontrollable.
Tokyo Control suggests heading for the closer Nagoya Airport, 133 kilometers away.
Your position is 72 miles to Nagoya. Can you land in Nagoya?
No, negative. Request back to Haneda.
The crew want to aim for the longer runway at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. The aircraft is still above 20,000 feet. Passengers are struggling to breathe.
There's damage at the back. I don't know what to do. People can't breathe.
Captain, the oxygen mask in 5 right failed. I think we better descend.
Hi.
The pilots attempt to lower the plane's altitude to increase the cabin's oxygen levels.
Nose down! Nose down!
Yes, sir!
Nose down! Use both hands! Both hands! Yes.
6:38 p.m.
Doesn't work!
How about putting the gear down?
To create drag and slow down the 747, the crew drop its landing gear. But a controlled descent is proving impossible. Tokyo Air Traffic Control follows the plane on radar. Over the next 3 minutes, the aircraft does a complete 360-degree turn, losing altitude all the time.
Can you control the aircraft now?
Japan Air 123, uncontrollable.
Japan Air 123, roger, understood. Would you like to contact Haneda?
Keep it as it is. This may be hopeless.
At Yokota, a nearby U.S. military airbase, emergency crews are standing by.
Japan Air 123, Japan Air 123, full approach on guard. Can you hear me? Squawk 5423.
Keep the gear down.
6:47 p.m. The plane has dropped to 7,000 feet. But with little control over its heading, the pilots now face new dangers.
Hey, there's a mountain ahead.
JAL 123 is now miles off course, deep in the mountainous region northwest of Tokyo.
Turn right. There's a mountain there. Take control to the right. Right turn.
Right turn, that's right.
We could hit the mountain.
Yes, I know.
The crew battle to lift the aircraft out of danger.
Left turn. Put the power on. Left turn now. Left turn. More power. More power. Max power.
6:53 p.m. The pilots wrestle the plane up to 13,400 feet. But it's still 65 kilometers northwest of Tokyo Airport. All air traffic control can do is watch.
We are ready for your approach at any time and coordinating with Yokota. Yokota available for landing also.
Power stop. Flapping now.
On board, the plane pitches forward and starts an uncontrolled dive.
Power. Power. Flap. Close up. It's the end.
Japan Air 123, do you read? Japan Airline 123, do you read?
The plane disappears from radar.
Do you read?
The wreckage of a jumbo jet can be seen scattered across the mountains. A specially configured 747 loaded with more than 500 people at the peak of one of Japan's most popular travel holidays, and no signs of survivors.
I knew from the breaking news that a plane had disappeared from the radar, but I had no idea if my husband was on that plane or not. I can't remember how much later it was when we were able to read out the passenger list. When it was announced on television, when I heard it, I knew for certain he was on that flight. How can I put it? I was aghast.
Just 18 minutes after the plane disappears, a U.S. Air Force C-130 locates the wreckage on a ridge of Mount Oshtaka, 100 kilometers northwest of Tokyo. It radios the Japanese authorities with coordinates. The U.S. offers military assistance. The Japanese decide to go it alone and set in motion their own rescue mission. In charge are the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. Yoshihisa Masuda is stationed at a military base in Chiba Prefecture, close to where the plane crashed.
It was just as I returned to headquarters after my summer leave. The base was in uproar. I asked a colleague what was going on, and I was told that the whereabouts of a JAL flight were unknown. The night the plane crashed, the base was put on standby, and people were saying that we were probably going to go out.
A Japanese helicopter sent out reports no sign of survivors. The mountain terrain and lack of equipment for nighttime operations slows any larger Japanese rescue effort. It doesn't reach the site until 14 hours after the crash. Miraculously, 4 survivors are found, despite spending a night on the mountainside. But 520 people are dead, including Q Sakamoto and Ward Wallach.
I think when I first heard he was on the plane, there was an air of unreality. I mean, Ward was vibrant, he was young. It's not supposed to happen that way. It was unreal.
Shortly after the crash, survivors recall hearing the screams of passengers in the wreckage dying out during the night. Physicians at the scene note some of the injuries they found would not have been fatal if help had arrived sooner.
Of course, I found out afterwards that rescue operations were not carried out at the site straight away on the day. But they should have gone straight away. Why? Why did they take their time?
Now, by rewinding the events and going deep into the official investigation, we can reveal what lay behind the deadliest single air accident in aviation history. The Japanese Aircraft Accident Investigation Committee is responsible for investigating the crash. As demanded by Japanese law, alongside this is a criminal investigation run by the police. In the United States, the manufacturer of the 747, Boeing, is alerted to the disaster in Japan. John Purvis was a member of Boeing's Air Safety Investigation Team in 1985.
When we learned about this airplane and realized it was a 747, we were concerned, along with everybody, that this accident could really tarnish the reputation of the airplane, because at the time it was the largest commercial jet flying.
With the lives of millions of 747 passengers at risk, the United States National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, want answers to why this American-built plane crashed. NTSB representative Ron Schleed is assigned to investigate.
There was an extreme concern that if there is a mechanical problem, that it could be a generic flaw, and that could affect the entire fleet.
An investigation team of Boeing engineers and members of NTSB heads for Japan. But once there, gaining access to the site proves difficult.
When we arrived in Tokyo and got to the hotel and first met the Japanese, it was clear there was some problems in getting access to the information that was known and to the accident site eventually.
As the plane's manufacturer, Boeing has an internationally agreed obligation to investigate the crash to make sure all other 747s are airworthy.
However, because this flight, Japan 1223, was a domestic flight, the international rules did not apply in 1985. Therefore, we did not have an automatic right to go we had to request permission to travel and to work with the Japanese.
Whilst the Americans wait for police permission to access the crash site, Japanese air accident investigators share with them JAL 123's cockpit voice recordings.
We could hear an explosion on the voice recorder. In fact, there were two loud explosions, one right after the other.
Survivors confirm there was an explosion at the back of the plane, leading investigators to a chilling conclusion.
Worldwide in the 1980s, there had been several terrorist acts, hijackings and bombings of airplanes. So when this accident occurred, it gave us a strong suspicion that it was an act of terrorism. We were very highly suspicious that this was a bomb.
Further evidence of a possible bomb detonation comes to light in Sagami Bay, 153 kilometers south of the crash site. Japanese sailors discover a large piece of the plane.
One of the early things we were shown was the vertical fin, or the tail of the airplane, which had come off over water south of Tokyo, right under the flight path of the airplane. And it indicated that the airplane had had a catastrophic problem well before they ever got to the accident site.
A photograph taken during the last minutes of JAL 123's flight confirms investigators' fears. It clearly shows the tail fin is missing.
It was, very clear that something unusual had happened. And again, this added to our conjecture that this could have been a bomb.
5 days after their arrival, the American investigation team is granted permission by the Japanese police to access the crash site. Makeshift helipads mean helicopters can now land on the remote mountain ridge of Mount Osaka, north of Mount Fuji.
It was chaotic at the top. Helicopters coming and going and coming and going continuously.
The investigators begin searching amongst the wreckage for JAL 123's major structural components.
One of the things you do as an investigator is you first look for what we call the four corners of the airplane. Where's the nose, where are the wingtips, where's the tail?
A few meters down the ridge, they find remains of the aft pressure bulkhead, or APB. This circular structure is made of a series of overlapping metal plates riveted together. Sitting between the cabin and tail section, it's designed to stop pressurized cabin air escaping through the back of the aircraft.
When we first saw the bulkhead, it was, of course, torn up and badly damaged into many pieces, 6 or 8 or 10 major ones and some little ones. And the pieces were kind of triangular shaped. They ran from the center of the bulkhead out to the edge, something like a chunk of an umbrella.
The investigators study the APB for the telltale signs of bomb damage.
A bomb leaves very distinctive evidence on the metal when it explodes. It has so much energy that's more energy than you can generate in an actual aircraft crash.
But most of the bulkhead wreckage displays damage consistent with a high-speed impact.
One of the general observations when metal is ripped apart, it'll leave a distinctive, what I call a sawtooth shape of a fracture. and it's just ripped apart. We saw evidence of that in the aft part of the aircraft and in most of the aft pressure bulkhead debris. It certainly wasn't caused by a bomb.
Looking closer, they discover some unusual damage.
There was one piece of the bulkhead that showed curious characteristics different than the rest of the wreckage from the bulkhead. In one area, two pieces had separated in a very straight line, as opposed to the rest of the bulkhead, which had been torn and ripped in overload. It just separated or failed differently, and I wanted to know why.
The team want to examine the bulkhead section in their lab, but the police refuse permission, as their investigation to establish whether a criminal act is responsible for the crash is still ongoing.
Because in Japan, the criminal investigation takes precedence over a safety investigation, this caused difficulty for the safety team to gain access to the accident site, to gain access to other data, including the wreckage that fell off the airplane. It complicated and delayed some of the safety investigation because the criminal investigators were in charge.
The team invent an ingenious way around the problem.
Boeing came up with a procedure to take replicas of the fracture surfaces, essentially a tape, like adhesive tape, that they would put on the fracture surface. It would not damage the fracture surface. It would take a mirror image of replica of the fracture, and then that could be examined in a laboratory.
The investigators examined tape imprints and field sketches taken from the bulkhead section, displaying the unusual damage. It appears one bulkhead plate has sheared off along the line of rivets, joining it to its neighbor.
This metal had torn through these holes. I thought I had detected fatigue, and what we were seeing on the bulkhead was our eureka moment. It was the golden bullet.
Having detected the telltale signs of metal fatigue, the investigators now need to know what caused it. They must also find out whether this is an isolated incident or a problem that could ground over 600 747s in service at the time. The investigators pore over the plane's history. In it, they discover that the plane had once been involved in an unusual accident. They learned that in 1978, at Osaka Airport, the plane's pilot landed with the nose too high. The tail struck the ground and scraped along the runway. The aft pressure bulkhead was damaged and needed repairing.
It had been repaired 7 years earlier, and it became very, very critical to the investigation, very interesting to us. Discovering the fact that the airplane had had a repair was a huge turning point in the investigation.
Boeing HQ in Seattle faxed the repair report to the investigative team in Japan.
When the airplane had been damaged and the repair crew looked at the airplane, it was clear they were going to have to replace the bulkhead. They elected, I think, to replace just the lower half because of shipping problems with the whole bulkhead.
The Boeing engineers designed a repair. They made a drawing and written instructions on how to put the bulkhead back together.
The 1978 repair design instructs Boeing engineers to attach the new lower half of the bulkhead to the existing top half. To join them together, they're secured with a splice plate held in place with 3 rows of rivets. As the unusual metal fracture sheared off along the line of rivets, the investigators' suspicion falls on the join between the splice and the bulkhead's 2 halves. The team calculates what would happen if the repair used fewer rivets than required.
One of the scenarios we considered during our discussions was, what if the repair to the bulkheads was done improperly? One of the team members did a mathematical calculation, if that were true, and it determined that the bulkhead would fail at about 11,000 cycles.
Remarkably, the plane had performed 12,319 takeoff and landing cycles since the repair, very close to the predicted number. It's a breakthrough moment. A faulty bulkhead repair could be behind the world's deadliest single aircraft crash. The investigators now need hard evidence to back up their theory. Japanese police again grant access to the crash site, so the team can examine the wreckage in more detail.
So we went right to the area of the pressure bulkhead that had what I considered a curious-looking fracture.
We discovered that the repair had not been done as designed. In the process, they had a place where they had to put in the splice plate, and it had been done wrong.
The investigators discover the splice plate from the wreckage is an incorrect size. It appears that to make it fit, the engineers deviated from the repair design.
The splice plate, in fact, had been cut into two pieces.
The narrower section was fixed with a single row of rivets. The wider section of the splice was fixed with a double row.
That rendered that section of the splice basically to 70% strength of what it would have been otherwise.
Because of the faulty repair, just one row of rivets takes most of the force during every takeoff and landing pressure cycle. During each cycle, the bulkhead stretches and shrinks like the skin of a balloon. Tiny cracks form and grow around where the rivets punch through the metal. Some 12,000 cycles after the repair, the splice plate shatters. High-pressure air from the cabin bursts through the hole, weakening the bulkhead, causing it to fail explosively. This failure is heard as the first explosion, as high-pressure air from the passenger cabin bursts through the bulkhead.
Left turn now! Left turn!
Investigators now want to know the reason for the second explosion. Following the discovery of wreckage in Sagami Bay, they know that JAL 123 lost its tail fin 12 minutes into the flight. Revisiting the flight recorder, they realize this is around the same time that both explosions are heard, leading the team to an astonishing conclusion. As high-pressure air bursts through the failed bulkhead into the tail section, it blows the tail fin clean off.
During the design of the 747, we didn't anticipate a vertical fin coming off or a pressure bulkhead blowing out, and it just wasn't something that was anticipated to happen.
The investigators must now find out how an exploding bulkhead and lost tail fin led to the pilots losing control and the plane crashing. Air traffic control tracked JAL 123 meandering deep into the Kanto mountain range, away from Haneda Airport in Tokyo, and recorded the plane repeatedly losing and then gaining altitude. Through plotting the plane's flight path, the investigators recognize a familiar pattern, a type of aircraft motion called a phugoid. As JAL 123 begins to dive, it accelerates. The increased speed generates lift, and as the plane climbs, it slows, causing it to dip again. The investigators know this phugoid motion is indicative of an aircraft with inoperable control surfaces. These are critical for banking and controlling the plane's altitude. The rudder, attached to the tail fin, controls yaw, the angle at which the plane flies forward through the air. Loss of a rudder alone will not lead to phugoid motion, but major damage to a plane's hydraulic system will.
Large modern airliners, all the flight controls are boosted by hydraulic pressure. There's no way the pilot has enough strength to move the flight controls through cables and pulleys like in the old days. So the hydraulic systems power the flight controls.
The team realized JAL 123's hydraulics were critically damaged during the bulkhead's explosion.
To get the 4 hydraulic systems up into the vertical fin and to the rudders, all 4 have to go up there. And that means they have to run through the pressure bulkhead to start with, and they have to run up into the vertical fin.
As the tail fin rips off, it severs critical hydraulic lines. The aircraft is paralyzed.
Once they lost the vertical fin and the hydraulic systems, the pilots were only able to minimally control the airplane with engine power. The airplane continued to fly in circles, up and down, virtually out of control.
This explains why the plane flies in a phugoid motion. Why the crew have extreme difficulty controlling the plane's descent.
No!
And why it cannot turn back to Haneda Airport and instead descends deep into the Kanto mountain range. The crew's only option is to ride the throttle, trying to maneuver the plane by powering each of the engines separately. At the mercy of their stricken aircraft, there is nothing the pilots can do. A crash is inevitable. Having delved deep into the investigation, we can now reveal the events that caused the worst single aircraft accident in aviation history. June the 2nd, 1978. 7 years to disaster. A JAL Boeing 747's aft pressure bulkhead is incorrectly repaired following a tail strike incident, leaving it critically weakened. 6:12 p.m., August the 12th, 1985. 44 minutes to disaster. The same JAL plane takes off from Haneda Airport, Tokyo. As the cabin pressurizes, tiny cracks on the repaired bulkhead begin to grow. "32 minutes to disaster. The bulkhead explodes. Pressurized air blasts into the plane's tail section, ripping off the tail fin and severing the hydraulic lines. 31 minutes to disaster. Captain Takahama declares an emergency. The pilots fight to control the aircraft, unaware that their basic flight controls are permanently disabled. The plane climbs and dips. The pilots struggle to maneuver with engine thrust alone. Eight minutes to disaster.
Turn right.
The pilots guide the plane down to 7,000 feet.
Right.
But it's now in the heart of the Kanto mountain range. 6:56 p.m. Seconds to disaster.
Pull up. Pull up.
But the tragedy isn't over. Testimony from one survivor reveals that others also survived the impact. "24 minutes after disaster, an American Air Force C-130 finds the crash site and reports its location to Japanese authorities. A hovering Marine Corps helicopter offers to drop 2 men onto the mountain. But just a minute later, an order comes through demanding they return to base. 9 a.m., 14 hours after disaster, the first Japanese rescuers arrive on foot at the crash site. How many more passengers could have survived if U.S. forces had been allowed to land becomes a focal point for bereaved relatives. To this day, there is no clear understanding as to who declined U.S. help. No one in the Japanese self-defense force admits to ordering the U.S. crew to stand down. But in response to the crash and subsequent fallout, the Japanese self-defense forces did purchase helicopters and equipment designed for nighttime operations in mountainous terrain. The disaster also has profound ramifications for Japan's air industry. JAL President Yasumoto Tagaki resigns shortly after the accident. A JAL maintenance manager commits suicide. A terrible price had been paid, and now lessons had to be learned.
One of the things I got out of this accident investigation was that the accident really was preventable if the engineering work on the repair 7 years before the accident had been scrutinized a little more carefully and done properly, the accident wouldn't have occurred.
Boeing confirmed an incorrect repair caused the failure of JAL 123's bulkhead. The company changed their procedures, so significant repairs are scrutinized before implementation and afterwards by a second pair of eyes. Regular checks are made to detect any signs of metal fatigue. To reduce the vulnerability of the 747's hydraulics, a valve was added to the line controlling 2 of the plane's elevators and the lower rudder. If this line is severed, some control should still be possible.
I think this accident taught the aviation industry a lot of lessons, things about airplane design and maintenance. It was really an important step in improving aviation safety around the world.
JAL admitted no liability for the crash, but offered to pay compensation. 90% of the victims' relatives settled with the airline without going to court. But neither the compensation nor the improvements to safety offered much comfort to the bereaved relatives.
There was a sense among, I think, all the victims, but certainly in my family, that this was wrong. What happened was avoidable, that it didn't need to happen,